So we need to talk about the thing that you are looking at right now, and that's your screen. There are a ridiculous amount of display devices, and I have no idea what kind you're looking at, but we will end up talking about it. Now, in my office, I have a laptop. I have a full-size, well, actually ultra-wide gaming monitor, and I have a 100-inch projector screen. So whether it's a 10-inch laptop, 13, 15, which I have all three here, or it's a external monitor that we're plugging in with HDMI or VGA, or it's a full projector, there are different kinds of screens, and we need to learn about those. So let's take a look at what different kinds of screens we have, as well as how to troubleshoot them when anything goes wrong. So in this section, we will be talking about not only the different types of display devices, but how to support them. And it's pretty simple to really just get used to what you have in front of you all day, but as a tech, you'll be in front of different types of devices, which include different types of monitors being plugged in. So let's take a look at the fact that we have a few options that are, well, pretty advanced, to be honest, in regards to what's going on in these things. LCD stands for liquid crystal display, and they are definitely energy efficient. One of the most, to be honest, that we have. OLED is going to be the only thing that goes above and beyond that. But you see a lot of different acronyms on your screen, and I want to go through some of those with you. So LCD, again, liquid crystal display. They're small, they're energy efficient, and these are pretty easy to get out of their box and set up because they don't weigh a whole bunch. But you have millions of pixels that are filled with liquid crystals, and it's pretty much just a grid pattern. And those pixels are either open or closed, and they let the light through from the backlight. Now, LCD monitors use either CCFL or LED strips. So CCFL actually stands for cold cathode fluorescent lamp. Again, CCFL is cold cathode fluorescent lamp. And it either uses those or different LED lights to actually light your monitor. This is the backlight source. So CCFLs actually use electrodes and mercury vapor to create UV light, and that's what the light source or how that light is created. Now CCFLs are a little bit thicker and heavier, but they're more expensive, and they have a better picture per se. Well, they did back in the day, but we've gone above and beyond that. So don't take that for a current message. But when they were new, they had a better display. The problem with them is that they were more expensive, they used more power, and they weren't necessarily as bright. We also found out that the lifespan was a little bit shorter than LED backlights. So we've pretty much upgraded the whole LCD scene with LED strips instead of using CCFL. Now, there's two more acronyms in that little box that you probably have not come across. Now, TN stands for Twisted Pneumatic, and IPS is in-plane switching. Now, IPS is one of those acronyms that is used more than once in IT, and even A+. IPS, from a different chapter, if you remember, stands for Intrusion Prevention System. So this is really good to know as far as your exam questions, looking at the concept that they're really trying to push towards. So if they're asking you about monitors, then they're talking about LCD screens. But if they say IPS in regards to security or access control, then they're probably talking about intrusion prevention. So let's jump back to these two acronyms, TN and IPS, Twisted Pneumatic and In-Plane Switching. Now, Twisted Pneumatic has faster response times, much higher brightness, and uses less power. They're a little bit less expensive to manufacture, but they have a lot more color shift or what's called distortion when viewed at an angle. So you've seen viewing angle numbers as far as how far from the center you can get from a display and still see a very clear picture. IPS wins the battle with that every time. So you have a little bit of a difference between these two. IPS does provide the better color reproduction and have much better viewing angles. And that's pretty much the biggest difference when it comes to your LCD screens choosing between twisted pneumatic and IPS. Now, OLED stands for Organic Light Emitting Diode. This is still LED, but it uses organic compounds that emit light when it's subjected to electric current. So that's how it provides the light or the light source. A little bit different than how LEDs work. Now, OLED screens can be used in a huge variety of dimensions, even more than your classic LED screens, but they're currently being used in everything from computer monitors and TVs down to tablets and cell phones. Now, everyone's heard of plasma. You may have had a plasma TV at one point. And they use xenon and neon rays behind their glass to provide visual, super high contrast, really bright brightness per se, high levels of brightness, and have some of the most vibrant colors. They also have an amazing view angle, meaning that you could look at this thing from way over on the side of the room and still have a very clear picture. But burn-in was an issue. And what burn-in means is if I left this screen on all day and all night, maybe even for 2 or 3 days over the weekend, when I came back and switched the screen to something else, there would still be a shadow copy of this exact screen on my monitor. And you might not be able to see it very clearly, but it can cause issues when you're on different screens, especially if this had a lot of color to it, or had bright reds, bright greens, and blues. It would cause distortion in the color in things that I switch to, like future slides or watching a video. So not the best option. You can really take a look at plasma as well. As far as some of the downfalls to it, they're pretty heavy and they're not necessarily appropriate for business use, meaning that you're not going to find them in a lot of workstations, mobile phones, laptops. These are for bigger displays, most of the time TV 40 inches and bigger. Now, projectors are awesome, and I use them all the time. They're used to display video onto whiteboards or other surfaces. Usually, the smoother the surface and the brighter white it is, the better environment you have for your projector. You don't necessarily have to use a projector screen that's specialized made for this, but a white wall will do it as well. So systems can be used to display one image or several different images on the projector screen. So you could split your screen into quarters and have 4 pretty big things on your screen all at the same exact time, which is great. We use them for training. We use them in business when we want to show comparisons to past and current classes and what are we planning for the future. So there's no end to the uses of projectors. I see them more and more often in homes because people are switching out of those super expensive big TVs and jumping over to high-end projection systems for their home theater. So now that we've learned about different types of displays, we got to plug these things in. And your most common connectors and cables are on your screen. VGA, aka the DB15, was the absolute leader for a very long time. It is a high intensity cable that was most common for LCD monitors, and it has 15 pins in it in 3 rows of 5. So you've seen probably either the black or blue ends on the connector like the one that you see on screen, and you've used these to plug into projectors or older monitors. Now, DVI comes in a few different configurations, and there are 3 that you need to know about: DVI-A, DVI-D, and DVI-I. Now, DVI-A is an analog-only format. So analog only, that's what the A stands for. DVI-D is digital only, and it requires a video adapter if you are going to be using the digital interface, okay? However, DVI-I supports the best of both worlds. It can read and transmit both digital and analog format data transmissions. So it can accept either digital or analog, and you can use these on anywhere you have a DVI port. So I'm going to actually put on screen for you here. Give me just a second. Different types of DVI connectors. Now it's going to be a little fuzzy because I've blown the picture up a lot, but I want you to see this. All right, let's actually shrink it just a little. There you go. So here are the different DVI connectors. Now you'll see that they're pretty similar as far as their size. They're all going to have these grid of pins, and they all have the bar at the absolute minimum that goes across. Some of them will have 4 connectors or pins around the bar as well. These are easy to identify, and you may have to visually identify the difference between this and other connectors in an exam environment. So make sure you're comfortable with what these things look like. So HDMI is definitely on its way to being the leading connection type for all of our multimedia. HDMI stands for High Definition Multimedia Interface, and it is the first industry-supported uncompressed all digital and audio interface. So that was a mouthful, but what does that mean? It was the first connection type to be able to push out video and audio simultaneously in digital transmission. And it only uses a single cable, which is a pretty big deal and provided a lot of convenience for us. And this plugs into just about anything. Our DVD and Blu-ray players, our cable boxes, our laptops, our projectors, our monitors. It goes everywhere, and it's super, super easy to implement. One cord, audio and video are taken care of. Mini HDMI are just the smaller version, so you can use them with portable devices. Sometimes smaller devices will have a mini or micro HDMI cable port, and some of our very small projectors use those as well. So even though those are the most popular connection types, we do have some more that I want to go over. DisplayPort was an attempt to replace DVI and VGA, but it didn't take off as quickly and as big as they thought. I've been watching too much news about all this stuff, so I get these crazy words now in my vocabulary. But they're not backwards compatible with DVI or HDMI, but it is a royalty-free standard, which means that somebody made this and they didn't trademark it or copyright it or try and make an immense amount of money off of it. They opened it up to the market for an alternative to older standards. So again, DisplayPort, not something that you may use often, but you may have a DisplayPort port on your laptop. So take a look and see if you've got one there, that funny little rectangle area that you've literally never plugged anything into. Component cables are not RGB cables. Component and composite, I need you to keep separate. So component cables are analog video transmission only, and they are 3 different cables that they use. The simplest type of component cable is RGB, but there's other kinds as well that use different layers of colors per se. You see on your screen that you have Y, PR, and PB, and this is brightness and red and blue. So these are different ways to get color across. Now, composite cable is a single video-only cable for analog picture format only. The one that I want you to focus on here is RCA. You have 2 different types of RCA cables as far as what you see, but they do the same thing. You have red, yellow, and white, or red, yellow, and black. So the yellow is for various composite connections, is what they describe it as, meaning that it's going to transmit video. Your red is for the right channel audio, and your black or white is for the left channel audio. So you have yellow for video, and the red for right channel, and your black or white for your left channel. So RCA cables and connectors were one of the first to carry audio and video to different devices, but it still wasn't a single cable. And it was replaced pretty quickly once other alternatives came out. So let's take a look at some really popular coax types. So coax, no matter what kind of connector you have at the end, is a copper cable, a single copper core that is going to be surrounded by an insulator, and then you'll have some type of shielding, usually braided or foil. So the insulator is literally going to separate the conductor and the shield to make sure that none of that data is lost and nothing's interfering with it. So coax is something that we use at home to get online through our ISP. We can use it at home for our cable, our set-top boxes, our TVs as well. And we're usually using what's called an F connector at the end of our coax cable, the one that's threaded that you'll then screw onto your router or your set-top box. Now, another connector type is the BNC, and you don't need to know what this stands for, but it stands for Bayonet Neil Councilman or Consulman, depending on what country you're from and how you say the gentleman's name. But this carries different frequencies from one device to another, and it can be used with radio equipment, aviation, electronics, and it can actually carry video signal as well. This is very similar to what we use at home, but the connection type is different. It is much more secure and water resistant. So you'll see that used a lot of times in hospitals and planes when we're connecting to radio equipment. The last one here on the bottom is what's called an S-video connector. None of us usually call it a mini DIN 5, but that is its technical name. S-video is a legacy connector now that is for analog only as far as video signal, no audio at all. And there were two different signals that it actually carried. One was brightness and one was color. And your top resolution was 576i. They had 480i and 576i. Now we are in the 1080i, 1080p age with HDMI, and we've actually gone above and beyond 1080 now. So understanding that that's an old connector, we don't necessarily use it anymore, but you need to know about it because old stuff is still in play today. Now what happens if you need to plug in a VGI monitor connector, but you only have an HDMI port? Well, that's what adapters are for. And there are adapters from A to B in all different shapes and sizes and connections. So the ones that you see on screen are pretty common, DVI to HDMI and VGA to HDMI, but you might need DVI to VGA or something that's Apple proprietary. So there's adapters of all shapes and sizes out there, and a quick Amazon search will do you good. Now, I don't want you to memorize this list by any means, but you need to understand what an aspect ratio is. And it's the ratio of width to height, and they're always going to be described in that order. So the monitor or projector width to the height of the screen, the width will be listed first. The aspect ratio is found by determining the proportion of the number of pixels across the screen to the number of pixels up and down the screen. So a quick example is the 640 by 480. This is the equivalent, if you divide it all the way down, to a 4:3 ratio, meaning it is 4 wide by 3 up and down. Okay, so these are some common aspect ratios, but definitely not every aspect ratio is what is on screen in front of you. So we've learned a lot about our devices, but how do we get these things configured? Well, these are the different pieces of considerations or information that you'll want to know when choosing a new display device, installing your display device, and configuring and adjusting it to your needs. Now, resolution is literally just the number of pixels that make up the dimensions of the display. So the value is always given in the horizontal by the vertical pixel numbers, just like we just talked about. This is the height by the width. Now, the most traditional ratio that's still used is the 4:3 resolution or aspect. But as we're getting higher resolutions and wider screens, you'll see that those are able to change. Now, native resolution, you may have seen on your second quiz, we talked about this, is whatever the best quality image resolution is set at for any given monitor. It's pretty much the default. So display devices that have a native resolution will sometimes actually only display in that resolution until you go in and manually adjust it, because it always wants to give you the best quality image. So if you use a different resolution because your application needs it, or because you have multiple screens and you're trying to adjust for a certain thing, that may not have the best quality image, but it'll still work with certain monitors. Now, your refresh rate is important when it comes to TVs. And we may see this sometimes even important in your computer monitors in regards to trying to avoid what we call flickering. A refresh rate is literally the number of times per second a monitor refreshes its screen for every pixel on it. So each scan is referred to as a frame, and the rate is expressed in hertz. So if you have a 60 or 70 hertz refresh rate, that means that it's 60 to 70 times per second that it's refreshing that picture. Now, when you go shopping for a TV, you'll probably see things that are 120 and 240 hertz. And that's legitimately 240 times per second that it's updating the frame on your screen. It's pretty cool. Brightness is self-explanatory. It's how much light's being emitted from the display device itself. You need to understand that brightness is measured in these things called lumens. Lumens are the unit of measure for any visible light that's being emitted from a light source. So the higher lumens, the higher number of lumens, or the higher the luminosity, is the brighter that display device can get. Now, analog or digital is something that you must consider every time you purchase a new device. Most of us are going after digital displays now, but our legacy systems are going to support analog. So it really depends on the type and the make and model per se of your display device and what you're plugging it into. Now, some things that aren't necessarily required by any means, but you need to be at least aware of, is if you're purchasing or implementing monitors in a place that needs privacy, you can use what's called an anti-glare filter. These are pretty inexpensive, and they're pretty much just a dark gray or almost black film that goes over your projector, or excuse me, your monitor or screen, so that it can not only reduce glare from any light sources around, but it protects the image from being seen from different angles. So it's only going to allow the user that's directly in front of that display device from viewing the information that's on the screen. And the very last one is the color depth, and this is really talking about the quality of color. The number of bits that are being used to store a color pixel, meaning the more bits per pixel, the more colors that can be displayed. Our newer monitors are literally in the millions in regards to our color depth. So if you've ever seen a number like 1, 2, or 3, even up to 4 million as far as your color depth or pixel options, that's what they're referring to, is the color quality. Now, some of us use multiple displays at home or work. I know I personally love having 2 displays, but I have seen people with 4, 5, 6 monitors all plugged in doing a crazy amount of work. So 2 displays or 2 monitors is but you will see more than that in certain environments. Now, gaming workstations are notorious for this, and maybe even CAD CAM systems sometimes. For those of you who are into audio video editing, especially the video part, you probably would benefit from having 2 screens as well. Now, one of the things I love about this slide, and it's a problem that I think all of us have had at one point, have you ever set up 2 monitors and you try and get to the monitor on the left, but you have to put your mouse all the way to the right side and then it crazily loops around to the other monitor? Well, that's really annoying, and we need to figure out how to tell our system that the monitor on the left is actually on the left when it thinks it's on the right. And that's what this screenshot here for the screen resolution or display options is going to help with. Do you see where there's 1 monitor and 2 monitor? They're actually labeled with little circles and numbers. You can pick up and drag and drop the number 1 monitor to the other side of the number 2 monitor and release it. Then you'll apply your settings and click OK. And and you're able to then systematically have an update of where your monitors are in the physical world. Now you can move your mouse to the right and it'll go to the right screen, and you can move your mouse towards the left and it will reach the left screen, which is really convenient. So anytime you need to make a change to your display, here you're going to go into your display configuration. Now this is a screenshot from Windows 8, and it has a few different tools that you can adjust or configure your monitor. If you want your icons and the size of your text to be larger, there's a slider bar there that'll help you decide what's best for you. You can also look at the bottom there and you'll see that instead of changing the size of everything on your entire desktop, you can change only the title bars or only specific aspects. There's a drop-down menu there so that you can choose what you want to increase or decrease in size. So once you have it all set up and you're able to see your different displays and configuration, you can see some resolution information and orientation here. You have it all set up, you have it configured. Now you've got an awesome monitor in place. What happens when it goes wrong? Well, first we're going to take a look at some of the most common issues and what are the possible solutions. Now, a dark screen is pretty easy to fix as long as it's only dark or dim and not necessarily completely off. If you have a dark or dim screen, you may just need to increase the brightness on that screen. However, if there is no picture whatsoever, you might want to start just checking, is the thing plugged in? Not only is it plugged in power-wise, but is it plugged into your source? Meaning your computer, your laptop, or whatever system that it should be getting a picture from. Some monitors now have smart energy settings. So if they're not plugged into a display source, they won't turn on at all. If you have flickering or distortion on old CRT monitors, well, there's 100 reasons that could happen. Your refresh rate might be way too low or high. It's really sensitive to that, so it'll cause flickering. It may honestly just need to be calibrated. There used to be a little button on our CRT monitors, and it would make the coolest, weirdest little noise, but it's because they were actually kind of magnetizing, per se, our display. And it would flicker around and go a little dark and come back, and everything would be calibrated. So CRT monitors are old, but we still do get to learn about them. If the display itself turns off, one of a few things is happening. Either something just got disconnected, meaning the power cord got taken out of the wall, or maybe the power strip for some reason has turned off. But if a monitor turns off and you haven't touched your computer in a while, it's probably just gone to sleep for power management settings. Now, if you have an application issue, that means that when you open a specific program or piece of software, that your screen is either flickering or it just goes completely blank. And that's because every application has requirements that they need a certain color depth and resolution and ratio that they work in. And if it's not compatible with what your monitor supports or the current settings, then usually it'll just shut itself down. Now, defective pixels come in two different forms: dead pixels and stuck pixels. Now, dead pixels are just little black spots on your monitor that no light will come out of at all. This usually happens in an LCD environment. Now, stuck pixels are ones that are still showing light, but they're only showing one color. So they're stuck on red, they're stuck on blue, or they're stuck on green. And either way, there's a few different ways to accomplish fixing this. Now, the first way that CompTIA, or not your book, but some books will suggest, is that you apply pressure against the screen with the blunt end of an object. And that's actually the very last thing I ever want you to do, unless you are trained in exactly what they mean by that. When we're talking about a pixel, we mean something very, very small. So you're going to need to apply pressure to a very small and the correct area. The purpose of that method is just like getting a massage. When you have a knot in your shoulder and somebody applies direct pressure to it and then kind of rubs it around a little bit, you're able to release the tension that's in that specific section of your body. And you can do the same thing with the monitor. Now, before you try that, I want you to try piece of software. And there are lots of free versions and paid versions out there, but there are some software programs that are meant specifically to fix dead and stuck pixels. And they'll do this in a variety of ways, especially if you can leave it overnight. You'll find pieces of software that will flash colors really, really fast across the screen. So it'll turn pink, it'll turn yellow, it'll turn green, red, blue, all kinds of colors. And it'll do this actually for a few hours, retraining the pixels to display in all colors. Now below that, you see color issues, which is pretty straightforward. If there's any patterns or incorrect colors, you might just need to adjust the tint or your display settings so that there's no discoloration. If there's physical damage to your display, you might have some internal damage as well. So you might not be able to repair it. If you've got a good amount of physical damage, or if there's been water damage, you're probably in a place where you're going to have to just go ahead and replace your monitor. So let's jump down to two more really common issues and then we'll move on. So video card issues are specific problems and they'll have very, very clean-cut symptoms in regards to when they happen. So anytime you see a blue screen of death and it tells you that there's a stop error, it's going to be your graphics card if it tells you that it's your graphics card. When you have a blue screen of death, it will usually tell you what the problem is. So you'll see that there's a graphics error or a graphics card failure in that point. The other thing that you'll see are curves or waves, these type of patterns per se in your display. If ever you're playing a video and it's not lined up properly and there's these different patterns within the video, it's because you're having an issue with your video card. So you need to make sure that it is installed correctly and all the way in its place, meaning the card is seated properly or pushed all the way into the slot. Make sure, of course, that your drivers are updated. That's one of the things that you should check first. And sometimes you might even just have some interference with other devices that are really close. So if you have other metal devices or it's next to another machine, move your computer away from that machine and see if it corrects the issue. After that, you might be looking at a failed video card. So I wanted to go over those because they're a little bit more serious of issues, and the one that usually requires some replacement of motherboard hardware and components. So we've learned a lot about display issues. I want you to take this time and compare that information to what is in your book. There are no differences, but there's going to be a little bit more depth that you're going to find in your book in regards to not only different types of displays, but the issues that you may come across as well. So you are done with that section, and I want you to get ready for a little bit more knowledge coming up here very soon, and then we have another exam. So I will see you back here for our next lesson, and be ready for a quiz. The more practice quizzes we do, the more prepared you are for your real test. And that is coming up here very soon. Get certified, get paid, and make it to the next level.